Thank you very much. So we are now in the last leg of today's event, and as the panelists exit the podium, I want to take the opportunity to introduce Ambassador Daniele Sepulveda, who will deliver the closing remarks. We're really very grateful for you to come here and share your views. Ambassador Sepulveda is Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and U.S. Coordinator for International Communications and Information Policy in the State Department's Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. Oh, that was a long one. wait, let me just share a little bit more of all your remarkable accomplishments. In this role, Ambassador Sepulveda leads the department's positions on communications and information policy. In the past, Ambassador Sepulveda served as Assistant USTR, and from 2004 to 2008, he advised then Senator Barack Obama on trade, immigration, interstate commerce, labor, and ethics and lobbying reform. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sepulveda. Please come to the podium.
Thank you. It's been an incredibly interesting morning. I'm tempted to just scratch my prepared remarks and talk off the cuff, but I won't do that. I do want to say thank you very much to Brookings for having me. It's great to see so many of you, particularly my friend and colleague Demetrios Marantis, who served in the Senate with me and then was one of my many superiors in the administration when I started at USTR. I will want to talk during the Q&A about some of the issues raised on Japan and international governance and internet governance, privacy issues, network neutrality, net mundial, et cetera. But I will turn now to my prepared remarks, which are directly related to what we've been discussing today. As has been pointed out, there are 3 billion people connected to the internet today, and set to join them are trillions of devices on the Internet of Things. Together, those connections and the data and the economic activity that they generate are what constitute the global economic digital economy. America and Japan are leaders in the global digital economy, not just as producers and consumers, but as advocates for the policies that enable its existence and its continued development. Our partnership is strong because we both believe that promoting continued global digital connectivity with as little friction as possible injected into the transfer of ideas and information holds the potential to lift people out of poverty, formalize the informal economy around the world, increase the efficiency of supply chains, increase the productivity of workers, raise wages, and in general, improve people's lives. So what does that mean for our trade policy, and why should advocates for the global internet support our work in this space, including Trade Promotion Authority and TPP? The answer is this: the value that trade agreements can add to the strengthening of the global internet economy as a platform for progress lies in the language that America and Japan are championing. The goal is to establish a joint commitment among signatories to policy that encourages private sector investment in the networks that enable the transmission of data across borders, for example, by protecting cloud computing against data localization, and provisions preserving the free flow of information over communications networks that connect peoples, nations, and firms. These are two critical components to the future of the global internet. Those provisions, applied to as many markets as an agreement like the TPP will cover, can create the certainty of a safe space for the internet to continue to grow that covers millions of people and can set an example for the rest of the world to follow. Senator Ron Wyden, the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, has made the argument that, quote, America's trade negotiating objectives must reflect the fact that the internet represents the shipping lane for the 21st century of goods and services. Trade in digital goods and services is growing and driving economic growth and job creation all around the country. U.S. digital exports are beating imports by large margins, but outdated trade rules threaten this growth by providing opportunities for protectionist policies overseas. The U.S. has the opportunity to establish new trade rules that preserve the internet as a platform to share ideas and for expanding commerce. Senator Wyden is absolutely correct. He is widely acknowledged as one of the strongest champions for the open internet in our Congress, and his work on trade is completely consistent with that body of work. Our pending agreements with nations in the Pacific community will establish rules for the preservation of those virtual shipping lanes as enablers of the transport of services and ideas, allowing startups and the voices of everyday people to challenge incumbent power in markets and ideas. We know that both old and new American businesses, like Square, small and large alike, like the people that Square serves, are dependent on the global internet as the enabler of access to previously unreachable consumers and markets. In the US alone, American internet companies and their global community of users contribute over $141 billion in annual revenue to overall US GDP, simultaneously employing 6.6 million people. And the internet is not simply about the World Wide Web. It is the communications platform for managing global supply chains, distributing services and goods, and for acquiring the market information necessary to succeed anywhere in the world. As Ambassador Froman has said, quote, "Trade done right is part of the solution, not part of the problem," end quote. It is, when done right, an enabler of the values that America holds dear. And that idea is neither new nor is it partisan. It was Woodrow Wilson who said, "The program of the world's peace, therefore, is our program." And that program, the only possible program as we see it, is this. And he listed his 14 points. Among them was number 3, quote, "The removal, so far as possible, of all economic barriers and the establishment of the equality of trade conditions among all the nations consenting to the peace and associating themselves for its maintenance," end quote. It was Franklin Roosevelt who asked the New Deal Congress for the first grant of trade negotiating authority. And in his remarks at the signing of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, it was John F. Kennedy who said, quote, "Increased economic activity resulting from increased trade will provide more job opportunities for our workers. Our industry, our agriculture, our mining will benefit from increased export opportunities as other nations agree to lower their tariffs. Increased exports and imports will benefit our ports, steamship lines, and airlines as they handle an increased amount of trade. Lowering our tariffs will provide an increased flow of goods for our American consumers. Our industries will be stimulated by increased export opportunities and by freer competition with the industries of other nations for an even greater effort to develop an efficient economic and productive system. The results can bring a dynamic new area of growth." I strongly believe that if John F. Kennedy were alive today, he would also cite what increased trade and lower barriers to entry could do for the global internet. It is fully consistent with the sentiments of these giants in our tradition, from Wilson to Kennedy, that President Obama most recently stated, "21st century businesses, including small businesses, need to sell more American products overseas. Today, our businesses export more than ever, and exporters tend to pay their workers higher wages. But as we speak, China wants to write the rules for the world's fastest growing region. That would put our workers and our businesses at a disadvantage. Why would we let this happen? We should write those rules. We should level the playing field. That's why I'm asking both parties to give me trade promotion authority to protect American workers with strong new trade deals from Asia to Europe that aren't just free, but also fair. It's the right thing to do." Preservation of these ideals is and should remain a bipartisan and broadly held goal. It is crucial to our future and contained within the language we will be asking the Congress to approve. Beyond trade policy and the critical provisions in the TPP for the future of the internet, America and Japan have been and are working together to ensure that our domestic digital initiatives are both enabling digital economy and leveraging it for positive purposes. We conduct annual dialogues on the subject and share information on ideas and issues ranging from how we use communications for disaster response, how we encourage competition, and how we are working to sensibly construct rules for the collection, use, and distribution of data in our markets in a way that protects privacy while simultaneously enabling innovation. In the multilateral space, and of most direct relevance to the work of my office, America and Japan are strong partners in the multilateral forums and negotiations where we work together to ensure that we preserve the decentralized, multi-stakeholder system of internet governance. Last year, our two governments partnered at the International Telecommunications Union's Plenipotentiary Treaty Conference to protect the internet's existing system of voluntary protocols and multi-stakeholder-led governance against initiatives by other nations to centralize control over the internet in the hands of governments at the ITU. We have no better partner in this fight than Japan. At the same time, we partnered at the Net Mundial conference in Brazil the Internet Governance Forum in Istanbul, and other institutions and gatherings in an effort to encourage and facilitate greater participation and representation from the developing world in the existing system of Internet governance, and for creating a space in which we can address outstanding challenges together through collaboration and cooperation rather than through control and compulsion. Together, we will continue to focus the world on expanding connectivity, keeping digital trade routes open, and ensuring that we continue to expand the digital economy and make it more inclusive. These are valuable, long-term efforts, and we have the kinds of bonds between friends and allies that will help us succeed. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sepulveda. That was really a fascinating set of remarks. So I want to just, ask you a couple of questions and then again bring in the audience. And the first thing I want to do is to give you, you hinted that you wanted to go back to the expert panel discussion on regulatory issues that both countries are pursuing, net neutrality, the privacy law in Japan, and so forth.
Sure.
So if you can weigh in on that discussion, please.
Right. In the first instance, the issue of privacy, what is the issue of privacy? In this space, we're talking about corporate and consumer privacy. So you're talking about how private firms collect, use, and distribute people's information. There are multiple models for ensuring that people are treated fairly and with dignity within that process. So in the United States, we have various sectoral laws. So you have HIPAA for health, you have Gramm-Leach-Bliley for financial services, and then underlying all of that, you have the FTC's authority to protect consumers against unfair or deceptive practices. In Europe, you have a very prescriptive model, a traditional model of rules and regulations where you follow a checklist of things that you need to do in order to achieve that outcome. And countries around the world are looking at these models and trying to figure out for themselves what works for them. At the end of the day, obviously, nations are sovereign to make law, and within their particular nations, you have to comply with their laws. The question becomes, can we create rules of the road that are protective of privacy but enabling of innovation, while at the same time being interoperable and mutually respected, even when they're not identical? And so it's okay, we think, for everybody in the world to be asking these questions. I know Brazil is currently working on a proposal, Chile is working on a proposal, and the EU is revisiting the EU Safe Harbor with our colleagues at Commerce and negotiating through to make sure that that's been adequately updated. In terms of Japan and the current privacy law, our technical experts, both in my office and at the FTC and at the Department of Commerce out of Ted Dean's TIA office, have been speaking with the Japanese constructors of this rule on a regular basis, almost monthly, if not monthly. We have experts who are fluent in Japanese working on this issue with them. What we've asked for is for the Japanese to ensure that our firms are getting an opportunity to express themselves and get a fair hearing as the process moves forward. There were many changes to the rules and laws and the law as it was originally proposed and where it stands today. Some of those were actually quite responsive to many of the things that our industry proposed and that we as government advocated as well. Where we stand now is to some degree of legislative ambiguity, where you stand at the end of almost any legislative procedure, and then you have to go through an implementation process. And it's in that implementation process that it will be critical to ensure sort of an easy user interface, for lack of better words, for firms who collect, use, and distribute people's information to interact with the Japanese government and ensure that they're in compliance with the law, but not have that process of ensuring that you're in compliance with the law be so prohibitive or restrictive or overbearing that it denies your ability to engage in commerce. But these are real and legitimate issues. There's no, and we're struggling with them domestically, we're struggling with them internationally. Our goal, again, is to try to create a legal, regulatory, and policy space where you're preferring cooperation and collaboration over control and compulsion. right? Where you're not trying to dictate the design of services, where you're not trying to dictate the design of technology, and you're trying to create as little need for a company like Square to have more lawyers and engineers. And what you want to make sure is that they can reach their consumers and their consumers can reach them, and everybody's treating everybody else with respect without having to have an excessive layer of intervention between the user and the enabler of a given service or good.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll come back to these also.
But I do want to go back to the network neutrality question.
All right.
The speaker raised the idea that Title II application of the Federal Communications Act is a regulation of the Internet. It is not a regulation of the Internet. It does not touch Internet protocols, does not touch content, and it only regulates the behavior of broadband service providers as it relates to their last mile connectivity, terminating monopoly to an individual. It is by no means the regulation of the Internet. And it's Tom Wheeler has said that network neutrality protections are no more a regulation of the Internet than the First Amendment of the United States is a regulation of speech. The First Amendment of the United States is an enabler of free speech. A protection of network neutrality is an enabler of the free flow of commerce. When countries around the world try to block an individual from providing a service to another individual or from speaking, or they take down an entire website, they do that through the infrastructure. Our fight, our domestic championing activity has been to ensure that every user on any device can reach every other user on any given device for both the exercise of their human rights as well as their ability to engage in commerce. And there should be no actor in that process that can control that activity, neither private nor public. And at the end of the day, it's the exercise of that underlying principle that the network should be neutral as to what you do with it, where you go, who you engage with, that is being protected in this act. And I'm intensely proud of both my administration and the chairman of the FCC for taking this action.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So I'm sure we'll come back to these issues, central issues. I want to shift a little bit the discussion because you also, in your remarks, you alluded to what President Obama said during the State of the Union regarding, framing the importance of trade policy. If we don't do it, China will do it. Who will decide the rules of the road? And I find in my own work when I, make presentations, one of the best ways to really convey what's at stake in the TPP is to actually engage in a mind exercise, a counterfactual, if you will. What happens if the TPP fails? What kind of world we would be living in? And I wonder if you would be willing to go along with these hypothetical.
No.
Oh.
The TPP will not fail.
No, but I think as a hypothetical, because then we have to imagine ourselves, what kind of rules will China put out there? How will the internet suffer? I mean, I think laying out all these consequences is important to understand why we are working so hard to make sure that TPP does not fail. I want to frame it that way so that you can.
But let's limit, for my purposes, I'll limit it to the relationship between the TPP and China as it looks at the digital economy issues.
Yes,
right?
of course.
So, in the first instance, you just had the recent, the professor talked about the proposal from China, either on two fronts, one in the financial services front to ensure that you're using only domestic providers of services or providing source code relative to the transmission of information, and then in the counterterrorism law that they're proposing on other fronts, which has been delayed, by the way, as a function of an immense amount of advocacy, not just by ourselves, but by Japan and the EU as well. And the premise in the TPP is that your default is to enable the free flow of communications, right? And cybersecurity threats are a real thing, they're not a made-up thing. The question becomes, how is it best dealt with? There are multiple points of exposure to risk, and we believe that the best way to deal with these challenges are through cooperation and collaboration with the private entities that have skin in the game themselves. I mean, when a financial services, a bank is hacked, they have as much at stake as anybody else, if not more. There are joint mutual self-interest to enable a collaborative approach to a solution through information sharing and best practices and other mechanisms that are responsive to the changing economy and responsive to changing technology in a way that very firm or prescriptive rule and regulation can't be, first. And second, we would not allow, and we will not allow, the veil of cybersecurity to be used for protectionist purposes. So what you're saying is we want you to use, you as a bank, to use only Chinese domestic software because of cybersecurity? Maybe. But maybe it's because you want to develop your own software sector. And maybe you don't want to give our software providers a fair access to your market. That's not fair. And I think that our USTR has been extremely strong in standing up for fair treatment of our providers in foreign markets, and we will fight against that. And having the alliance of the multiple countries of the TPP saying, yeah, that kind of way of doing public policy, that kind of way of managing the digital economy is wrong. When we go into international forums, we have this alliance of a large number of countries across not just widely divergent economic status, but also across widely divergent political philosophies, but a unified agreement on the idea that the internet should be global, open, and interconnected, and as lightly regulated and as frictionless as possible. That becomes an extremely powerful tool when people propose in treaty negotiations like the plenipotentiary or elsewhere, bad ideas that are contrary to that, and oftentimes it's China that's leading those conversations. So the greater our alliances grow, and the more that it's not just the United States, but when a bad idea is raised, it's the other countries of the TPP, Australia, Chile, whatever, making the argument that, look, we belong to an agreement where we've established as a set of nations that we believe in the free flow of information. We're not going to come to this other organization and let you inhibit that free flow of commerce. That can only be good for us.
Great, thank you very much. So questions from the floor. We have two here. Just wait for the microphone.
Hi, Rita Chen from Central News Agency, Taiwan. Thank you, Daniel, for the nice presentation. The Amazon is less successful in China, and then even the Facebook still prohibit in China, but the Mark Zuckerberg still made the one who blocked the internet, the official. And I just wonder, is TPP really helpful for changing the current situation? And since the China is excluded from the TPP, how can we enforce them to play the game by rule? Thank you.
You raise a number of things in that question, but what the TPP does is proposes a counter vision, right? An alternative vision to control and compulsion, a vision that enables the free flow of commerce and the free flow of information. And so at the end of the day, you can look at results, and you can look at what the enabling effect is on both human creativity, productivity, innovation, and commerce. And China will see that given its market, 750 million people connected to the internet, it's a statistical outlier in many, many ways. And it can get away with many, many things that no one else can get away with. But that doesn't mean that it's in their interest to get away with it. That at the end of the day, we see that not only are industries and economies that are connected more successful than those that aren't, those that are connected on as frictionless and free terms and conditions as possible are more successful than those who are connected and not on those terms. So at the end, like you mentioned Mr. Zuckerberg and his trip to China and Facebook's discussions with China. At the end of the day, if China were to enable and allow Facebook to participate in that market or any other social network or any other service that allows free flow of communication between individuals and allows for the creation of community, it could be a great thing. It's obviously up to Facebook and China to determine what the terms and conditions are going to be under which Facebook goes there. But by that same token, we are going, as a government, going to continue to advocate for ensuring that those terms and conditions are as open and free as possible.
Hi, I'm Tai from Boston University, and I have a question about timing. How could the timing of Prime Minister Abe's visit to the U.S. and the incoming U.S. presidential election cycle affect the timing of TPP and granting of TPA? And do you expect fundamental agreements to be reached before the Prime Minister's visit, since we do not have free flow of information out from the negotiations? Thank you.
That's very fun. I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I know some of the actors involved in the congressional negotiations, and we can't promise anything, but we're looking forward to the Congress coming together behind both TPA and TPP because it's in our interest to do so. And I think that Mr. Wyden, who is leading a significant portion of negotiations on our side, and as I've said, has spoken eloquently on these questions before, and Mr. Hatch and others will be able at some point in the near future to come to agreement. Will it happen before Mr. Abe's visit? I don't know.
Other questions? This gentleman in the back, please.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. What is being done to facilitate having meetings over the internet where people gather money for projects and have complete transparency?
I think if the question is about crowdsourcing of funding for given projects, it's not my area of expertise. I know that there's a whole lot of regulatory questions related to that from the financial services side, and there's an interest in Congress, but I can't speak to it with any expertise. Apologize.
One more question on the back.
Thanks. Jean-François Wattin with the French Treasury. Two questions, actually. The first one, I think Professor Foster reminded us this morning that internet is not only a tool for trade, but a fantastic lever for changing our societies. So doesn't that it make it difficult then for countries which have different political regimes or societies which are different to agree on rules? And the second question about the free flow of information, which is a great concept. In my country, ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, is having quite a bit of success in attracting young people, including young girls, to go to Syria, join their ranks. Should the free flow of information rules apply to this propaganda?
So 2 questions there. The first is relative to how nations with differing values and moral structures can apply those values and moral structures in essentially a borderless environment in which people with differing morals and value structures can engage their people. And so, for example, in parts of the world, you can't say something negative about the Prophet Muhammad. And people on Facebook will do so, or people on other networks will do so, Twitter or whatever. There has been a mechanism rolled out by which the companies themselves are engaging and interacting, the platforms are engaging and interacting with governments around the world to try to figure out the cleanest mechanism, the fairest mechanism by which to ensure that any request for takedown of information relative to the protection of whatever values exist in that particular country are done in as narrow a way as possible, as targeted a way as possible. So instead of taking down all of Twitter because you're upset about one person's tweet, that you talk about specific tweets, they are subject to some sort of process by which the determination is made that that is in violation of whatever particular law in that particular jurisdiction is, and then you work towards the resolution of that problem. From our perspective, there are international agreed upon human rights, and we push very hard on platforms, whether they be American or otherwise, to ensure that they're not enabling the prohibition on the exercise of those rights. But it's an ongoing and difficult, complex, if not difficult, dialogue on which some very, very sharp minds are working, and we're in constant collaboration with them. Your second question was relative to the use of the internet by, in this case, violent extremists. And we had a recent conference, Rick Stengel hosted, and the Secretary and the President hosted a conference at the State Department on how do you counter violent extremism, of which one subpart is how do you counter the use of the internet by violent extremists to recruit potential terrorists. And our answer has historically been, in the first instance, all of the platforms engaged have terms of service. And in many cases, the mechanisms by which, or the visuals or language used to attract people to a violent cause are in violations of those companies' terms of services, and those can be taken down upon request. The more complicated challenge is when something isn't obvious, but is a debate of ideas or a debate of concepts in which a hateful concept is being presented, or a concept with which we find a serious disagreement. What do you do in that scenario? And our argument and work has been to try to use the power of the internet to provide an alternative force, an alternative voice, to champion the values and ideas that we stand for, and to discourage young people who might be attracted to violent extremism from pursuing that route, and making the case for the causes and values and mechanisms for human empowerment and life that we believe in. And so that's the current process. There's an immense amount of discussion between leaders in Europe and the United States, but other parts of the world as well, about what the best mechanisms are for countering violent extremism and the recruitment of people for that end. And we will continue working on that. Again, what we've been talking about today, a lot of what we've been talking about today are sort of the challenges and the difficulties that the creation of a worldwide global network has brought to us, and they are real. Cybersecurity challenges are real, privacy challenges are real, cross-cultural challenges are real. But I really do prefer to look at this from a glass half full, and I think it's a glass 3/4 full, with these other challenges being put into that equation. But we have to recognize the enabling aspects of human productivity and the exercise of basic human rights that the internet has enabled, that it acts for as an engine. And at the end of the day, whatever we try to do to solve the problems that the internet creates, we have to be very, very careful not to kill the goose that laid the golden egg and destroy all of those things that are not just good about the internet, but unprecedented, really amazing things. I mean, on the scale of the creation of the printing press, for enabling human development and activity. It's just, that's what I focus our work on. I think that's what the administration is focused on. And we are really, really working very hard to create mechanisms by which to establish safe spaces for cooperation and collaboration, both with industry, with our friends around the world, with civil society, engineers, academics, to try to address these solutions while ensuring that we preserve what is good and useful and working about the internet.
Well, I don't think we can end on a better note. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sepulveda. Please join me in thanking everybody today, all the panelists.